school.
I think just verbal, right?
I think verbal with Matt,
Yeah,
that would be
and
mine.
also because
Vote.
okay,
Yeah.
Perfect.
And we-
Vanessa, just to confirm, we do not have anybody sign up for public comment today. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then Angie, I'm just gonna email this all.
Yes.
Yes. So I'd just like to welcome everyone out, both individuals that are present and those that are joining us online. Would like to excuse Chair Hymas's presence. He is with us online, but he's not here in the meeting, and he has asked me to conduct this session of the Law and Licensing Committee. I was going to say we have an abbreviated agenda, which should help us go quickly, but I was told don't do that because that means we'll be
No,
here for a long time.
Um,
So it's my understanding we don't have any public comment. And because of that, let's go to our first item, 1.2, amendment to data sharing agreement with Navajo Nation. And Deputy Stallings, do we have anyone to address that?
Yes. Katie Chalice will be beginning, and I don't know how to turn on the mics. Are they? Do we need to turn on the mics? Can everybody hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. Yes, we have Katie Chalice, Dr. Chuck Foster, and Dr. Ferlin Clark. And I'm wondering, Mr. Clark, is that you that we are seeing?
Yes, that's me. Yes, it is me that you're seeing. Can you hear me? Your
I can hear
volume-
you.
Okay,
We can hear you online, but it sounds like we've lost the boardroom. Let's just
The
give it a
boardroom.
minute.
okay.
What's in here, or is that,
Your microphone is not on, by the way.
okay. Yours is working, if you'd like to speak.
What do you need me to ask?
Maybe ask Jerry if there's a reason why some of our microphones are not coming on. Share this.
Can you hear us now?
Boardroom, we can hear you now. And I've got a camera on probably Molly's chair. But we lost you for a few
Oh,
minutes.
shoot. Okay, I have to move back to my chair. Thought I was being smart.
And then I am going,
Loud and clear.
Okay.
I can hear everybody.
thank you for confirming. Hey, would you like to go ahead and start us off?
All right.
Yeah. Oh, red. Red is red
Red is-
hot. Okay. Good morning, committee. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. And I will not try to mask my excitement. I'm really excited to have the Navajo Nation folks here. So welcome. And so just for your information, Dr. Chuck Foster is a USB staff member who's here with me today. So this amendment that is for your consideration today is an extension of a data sharing agreement that's been in place with the Navajo Nation since 2011. There's no changes to the scope of the data sharing, but we've got folks here online and Dr. Foster here in person in case you guys have any questions about the nature of the data sharing.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Matt?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no questions, we'll just call for a vote.
You should make a motion.
Thank you. Member Lear, anyone would like to make a motion?
I'm getting my agenda.
I
Oh,
am as well.
Something
Well,
I want to
mentioned that.
okay,
I'm almost there.
I'm so
okay.
good to see you.
Maybe
Vice Chair Carey, while
Yes.
we're getting that up, can we ask Dr. Foster to give us a little bit on this data sharing, what he hopes to do with that?
Absolutely.
Dr. Clark, is the best way to speak to that as it,
Yes. Dr. Clark, yeah.
I believe Dr. Clark.
Do you want me to speak? Mr. Chair?
Please, Dr. Clark. Yes.
Okay. Yate, good morning. I just want to say good morning to the committee here and the Utah State Board of Education. I just want to let you know also that we have our acting superintendent, Claudia Edgewater, who's also online, and a number of our Navajo Department of Education staff. And so we just wanted to extend our appreciation on the long-standing relationship that we've had with the Board of Education and Dr. Foster in working on this data sharing agreement, and even going as far back as almost 10 years ago when the State Board of Education, the governor, signed a letter in support of the Navajo Nation's goal to become a state education agency, and also endorsed the accountability workbook that was sent to the president and the then Secretary DeVos. So this is in line with that in our effort to be accountable, to provide accountability reports on our students, on our graduations, student participation, especially, of course, related to Navajos. And I know the San Juan School District there has about 1,200 Navajo students alone. So we want to monitor, track attendance, absenteeism, performance of students in all the academic areas, the hard sciences, soft sciences, but is also Navajo language, culture, history, where it is available. But also just wanted to endorse the concept of tribal consultation related to ESSA and the sovereign to sovereign, government to government relationship that we have with the state of Utah. So just wanted to preface our appreciation to Ms. Chalice for helping facilitate this agreement. For the Navajo Nation, this is a really important goal. And so the Board of Education in the state of Utah has been a champion and a leader for us. So, Mr. Chair, I want to extend some time to our acting superintendent, Claudia Edgewater, to provide some additional comments.
Yes, good morning. Yat Shay Claudia Edgewater and Shia Shay in my discussion Shlon to look at the buses chain. Other to Shay the Shay dot Hopaha additional Hakot Ego the dance sunshine. Good morning and thank you for inviting us and having us on this call. I appreciate it. So on behalf of the Navajo Nation and Department of Education, thank you very much. So this is an extension of the current agreement that's already been put in place since 2011, which is great. But one thing I also want to comment on is as we move forward in being a data informed division of Navajo Nation to make more sound decisions, we might have to later down the line ask for probably like a revisement, or we might add to the agreement. I hope that's the doors will remain open on that as well as we continue down this journey of establishing data informed decisions for our nation of education. So but other than that, I do have other individuals on the line as far as like our data statistician, program manager, also our JOM representative as well, because the partnership would really be great to have in lieu of the schools that are in the area and places of Utah. Also with that, we really want to, as Dr. Clark had mentioned, go down the road of the SEA addressing that nature of developing Navajo education for Navajo land. So thank you, Dr. Clark, and thank you everybody online. I'm not sure, Mr. Tracy, he's our statistician who will also use a lot of the data sharing to be provided as well. So I'll have him comment on that. Joe Yahat, thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Good morning, Acting Superintendent. Good morning, Dr. Clark. Good morning, Doty team and all support staff. Roy Tracy here. Program Manager, Statistician for the Office of Educational Research and Statistics. And so we've worked generously with Utah State in the past. We do have other state agreements with New Mexico and Arizona, and each state understandably has a different sets of processes, and we respect those. And so I just want to extend my invitation for your presence here within Doty as well to come visit if you are in the area. And thank you for working with the Navajo Nation. And I'm in full support of the renewal of this data sharing agreement. And we appreciate everything you do in supporting Navajo students. Thank you, Dr. Clark.
Mr. Chair and the committee, I'd like to, we Navajo Nation, we support the amendment and the renewal. I definitely would like to have Mr. Foster, Dr. Foster, comment, because he's Navajo. He's your agent for the state. He's been a wonderful person to work with for the state of Utah in working with the different tribes in the state of Utah. So I'd like to hear what he has to say too, because he's the one that's also been championing this movement.
Thank you and good morning, board members and chair. I think this is a historical moment for both agencies as a government to government agency meet together in this agreement. And I think this gives an opportunity for the consultation between two groups. And I think the foundation for this is to improve and to move our Navajo students forward at each grade level. As the Dr. Clark mentioned, there's the hard and soft sciences, English, social studies, mathematics, that will help in terms of their foundation to carry their educational journey to the next level. And I also think that with the parents being involved in this whole process, I think it's a movement for the Navajo Nation. Dr. Clark, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that they're much more involved in the educational system on the reservations. And Navajo is just one of those tribes that welcome that. And I think the last part to this is that, the consultation that we have with the school districts, with the tribes, and some of the agencies that represent the Indian community. And I think those are foundations that we can start to build on and continue to build on. So I thank you for this opportunity to say a few words.
If I could, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I just wanted to echo what our Dr. Foster has been talking about. Parental involvement, health and school safety, student achievement, those are all central to our Navajo students succeeding. So this renewal, this amendment is going to take us one step forward for, what do they say when they landed on the moon? One step forward for
Mankind.
states, and then a giant step for mankind, something of that nature.
Yeah,
right?
there's man and then a giant step for mankind. There we go.
So between the state of Utah and the
It's
Navajo
the only
Nation,
one that was old enough to remember that.
so I just wanted to make mention of that. And then we would like to also have the opportunity to come up and visit you all in person, because I know that my predecessors in our Navajo Nation leadership were able to go to the Capitol and meet with the Board of Education and have a good conversation in person. So beyond extended invitation for you to come to Navajo, we would like to come up and visit you all as well. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. And we have a member of our board leadership here, and I'm sure that board leadership would love to set that meeting up.
Yes,
So
sir.
thank you. Chair Hymas, did that address the question that you had?
Yes, I'm very appreciative of the work that's being done here. I just drove through Navajo Nation in New Mexico. I don't know if that's where you are, Dr. Clark.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to find a good spot to eat in there. I don't know what's good.
Well, Dr. Foster has my cell phone number. There's a Shiprock Fair going on right now in northern New Mexico. So chili, of course, New Mexico, we're known for red, green chili. Navajos, of course, mutton stew, fried bread, tortillas, breakfast burritos. So you can come visit me as well.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Vice Chair Carey, for allowing me to ask.
Member Lear?
Yes, I have a comment and then I'd like to make a motion. I just, as I kind of was reviewing this, I remembered I worked with Chuck to write this initially. And it was really, in that moment, really amazing because the student privacy laws were very new. And also the collaboration with the Navajo Nation was very new. And it was, I think we had to have the documents translated and
Yes.
a lot more old school, but and Dr. Foster is ageless and larger than life. So not to lay it on too thick, but he kind of is. And it was an absolute honor to work with you and to do this. And I'd completely forgotten until I remembered this. And so I am so pleased to now be in a different position and be able to support you. I have the utmost respect for the whole situation. It's just wonderful to see the tribes really taking responsibility for this and helping their students with data. I think it's a great thing. So with that, a little bit of nostalgia, I move that the committee approve the amendment to the data sharing agreement with the Navajo Nation and forward to the board for approval.
Yes. So we have a motion on the that's been made, and that is that the committee approve the amendment to the data sharing agreement with the Navajo Nation and forward to the board for approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, aye, that's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Clark, Dr. Foster, and Director Chalice. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you as well. Yeah.
Let's go to item 1.3, research data sharing agreement with Westat. And Deputy Stallings, is there anyone from staff that would like to speak to that?
Yes, so we have Katie Chalice, Director of Student Data Privacy here with us. And then I believe Dr. Michael, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, Stekati, and you can correct me when you speak in just a moment, is joining us online. It looks like we have someone else as well. I apologize, I don't have your name. It looks like Ms. Molly Faulkner Bond also. And so Katie, would you like to start us out with the introduction?
Sure, thanks. So this is a new data sharing agreement, and I'm glad that our researchers are here on hand to answer questions about the nature of the agreement. I'll just mention just a very quick overview, which is that the nature of the study is to examine EL or English learner students and to kind of understand the way that policies surrounding those services that they receive affect those students. So I'm happy to answer questions about the scope, but I think the researchers would be a great resource to ask about the nature of the study itself.
Thank you. Does any board members have questions? Member Lear?
And this is just I was trying to find the exact statement in the agreement, didn't find it, but I recall reading it, that all of these data will be de-identified. Is that right? So we don't have super privacy concerns in terms of identifying students who would be English language learners or English learners.
Yeah, Vice Chair, may I respond to that?
Yes.
I am, yeah, I would agree with that statement. There's always risk, even when you're sharing de-identified data.
Do you, a follow-up, please, Chair?
Please.
And so, but you don't have any, you're supportive of this, you've reviewed it, you feel like it has all of the elements in place that are necessary to protect students?
Yeah, I would say the provisions that I would like to see in an agreement are in this agreement. And then I
Thank you.
think it's to the discretion of the committee and ultimately the board as to whether you think that
Okay.
this particular use case is of value.
Okay, thank you. And I am ready to make a motion when you're ready.
Yeah, Member Wood.
Just a question on N size. How do we, I mean, some of our classes may have one or two. How do we differentiate that N size? So we're really careful so that we don't identify students. What protections, can we just go through those specifically?
Yeah, I would say this is one of those data sharing agreements that the risk of re-identification of a student is non-zero on behalf of the researchers. However, at the point of publication, none of that, I would say there's virtually no risk of re-identification because for one thing, they will be cautious in their reporting measures and not report low N sizes or anything like that. But additionally, this is a multi-state study. So there's going to be a very broad data set here. So two pieces. One is that the risk that you have identified exists. It's a matter of kind of like trusting that the researchers will not make that public ultimately. Does that answer your question, Member Wood? Okay.
Board Member Hart.
Yeah, I'm without my computer right now. Can you tell me the date that this research, the length of the study in totality?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. One is the scope of the data request is broad in terms of school years. So starting in the 2013 to 14 school year, ultimately the study will end, and the scope goes through the 24-25 school year. And then beyond that, the researchers will have access to the data through 2028 in order to give them time to complete their study. Because at the end of the study, they're required to delete the data.
And so when will their working papers be published with any of the results?
I believe 2028, and I'll let the researchers speak to that if they want to clarify. If you have questions about that.
I do. If they were available, that would be, Chair, if that would be okay.
Please, and we would ask any of the those of you who are online that could address that, if you could.
I'm happy to
Either one.
start off the response if that's okay. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
My name, I'm Dr. Molly Faulkner-Bond. I'm a senior research associate at WestEd, who's partnering with WestEd, and I'm one of the principal investigators for this study. So there will ultimately be multiple public-facing reports from this study. They'll all be published by the U.S. Department of Education and will present aggregate results from the 30 states in this study. The earliest of those we hope will be published in 2024, and then several others will be published between 2024 and 2027. All states that contribute their data will receive personalized results from your state that are for the state education agency to use at your discretion. They are not, we will not give them to you in a form that is intended to be sort of published as is. It's information for the state to do with as it pleases.
Thank you. So we would be committing to data collection through 2025, right? Correct? Okay, thank you.
I do have one question for Director Chalice. Have we worked with either of these vendors before?
We have a strong working relationship with WestStat, with WestEd. I feel like I remember we have one previous data sharing agreement with WestStat. Is that right, Michael?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure. But WestStat has been in the education evaluation research business for about 60 years. So it's strongly likely.
Okay, yeah, and it
I-
sounds like
I
we're giving a
believe-
thumbs up from Superintendent Dixon.
I believe our superintendent sits on that board, maybe? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
And Director, in those prior relationships, have we ever had any issues or concerns that went unaddressed?
No.
Okay, thank you. Member Lear, did you say you had a motion?
I do. I move that the committee approve the research data sharing agreement with Westat and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you. We have a motion before us, and that is that the committee approve the research data sharing agreement with Westat and forward to the board for approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is unanimous. And it's my understanding that we have someone who requested public comment. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have not yet joined the Zoom room.
Okay, and when they do, you'll just let us know?
Absolutely.
Vice Chair, or in this case, Chair Carey. Director Chalice, I just wanted to let you know that the public commenter is going to be speaking to data sharing. So you may want to, when the person joins, I believe Chair Carey will recognize her to provide public comment.
And just for the record, I wanted just to state that this application to speak to this meeting during public comment was made during our actual meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to put that there. Thank you. Our next item is 1.4. The thank you for promoting meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities. And Deputy Stallings, do we have anyone to speak to that?
Yes, Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees, who supports USEEP as staff, is here with us. And then I believe Michelle Beck, who is chair of USEEP, is with us online. Ms. Voorhees, would you like, or Dr. Voorhees, would you like to start? And then I guess we could turn over to Chair Beck.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. I am very pleased as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support, which includes being the State Director of Special Education, to be your liaison to the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel. We meet 4 to 5 times a year and review data related to special education compliance and outcomes for students with disabilities. The Special Education Advisory Panel is made up of all basically of the stakeholders that are interested in the outcomes of students with disabilities, and at any one time, more than 50% of the membership is parents of students with disabilities or individuals with disabilities themselves, and including we have a student on our advisory panel this year, which has been really fun to have her. The advisory panel chooses priorities, looks at special education data, outcomes and compliance data, and chooses priorities every year to work on, and in many cases, but not all, makes recommendations to the board about policy and program initiatives related to that data. Last about 2.5 years ago and 2 years ago, the Special Education Advisory Panel made recommendations to the board to implement an meaningful inclusion project initiative in the state to provide professional learning and technical assistance to educators and community members to improve the access that students with disabilities have to general education, but not just the access, also to improve the meaningful progress that they are able to make in the general education core. And that is the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We've made a lot of progress in the state of Utah in the last 20 years, and you'll see some of that data in backup for Standards and Assessment Committee, because I'm going to be presenting that in about half an hour. But the board made a motion to direct staff to do several different things, which I'll be reporting to you on what we have done next month on your agenda. But the advisory panel has presented this memo to you to thank you for the work, for making that motion, for accepting their recommendation, making the motion, directing staff to develop and provide professional learning and technical assistance, and for the work that has been done. So this is not a memo that has an action. This is a memo thanking you for the work that has been done, asking that the work continue, but it really is a thank you. So Vice Chair Carey, if you would like to invite Chair Beck to speak to the memo, I think she would appreciate that.
Thank you. Absolutely. Chair Beck.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to appear remotely today and just give a little color commentary on this. I mean, obviously, the memo speaks for itself and it is primarily a thank you. But we also want to keep the topic top of mind, especially as we might see, new board members, new committee members, because while we acknowledge and are grateful for the many excellent efforts that are underway on this topic, we also need to remember that we can't just check this off a list. It's more like gardening. We have to always be mindful of this issue because inclusion is really the critical component to helping our students with disabilities achieve their greatest potential. So thank you for your work, for your support, and also thank you for letting me come today and speak to you.
Thank you, Chair Beck. I just have to say it seems backwards. I mean, we should be sending memos of thank yous to you for all the work you do. Whenever I visit with educators or parents, invariably the work you do comes up and the help to navigate what many consider a labyrinth. So thank you for all that work and love that you pour into it. Board Member Wood.
I'd just like to add an additional thank you to our staff. I was able to participate in the Meaningful Inclusion Conference at Davis High School and found many of our staff members there busy at work. It was an amazing conference and a lot of good input for parents. That's what I saw most, is that this was boots on the ground. These are the parents that are having to deal with these issues every single day, and that they were seeking answers and very engaged. And so thank you for all the work that you do.
Board Member Hart.
Yeah, I'd like to add just an additional thanks. When committees make it easy and make the information clear and actionable, it's so much easier to get that through the pipeline. So I thank you for untangling what is very much what you call it, a labyrinth, because that's why the board can help is when, and I would say that to any advisory group or any group advising anyone, when you make it easy, it ends up working out for everyone. So thank you for translating and providing the information so that we can make good decisions for students in Utah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, I want to thank you for those kind words and assure you I'll bring them back to the entire panel, because I'm just in this chair slot for 1 year, and you have a lot of great staff working on it and a lot of dedicated volunteers. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Beck. Thank you. It's my understanding that we are, Ms. Massey has now joined us in the Zoom room. Is that correct? Okay, Ms. Massey, thank you for, well, can you hear us?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? Do I need to start my video?
No, we can hear you, yes. And yeah, you can play the video or speak to us how you would like to do that.
Great.
Yeah, and we've set aside the 2 minutes and that'll start when your video starts or you start to speak.
Well, good morning, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to me this morning. I know you guys have a very busy schedule. I was with you all day yesterday at home watching your USBE meeting. So the reason why I wanted to speak with law and licensing, can you hear me okay? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to speak with law and licensing is because I do see 2 more data sharing agreements on your agenda today. And this is deeply concerning to me as a citizen. So I'll just start by sharing with you Utah Code 53E 9305. In section F, it says the collection, use, and sharing of student data has both benefits and risks. Parents and students should learn about these benefits and risks and make choices regarding student data accordingly. And then in 53E9304, it says a student owns the student's personally identifiable student data. The reason why I'm quoting these 2 codes is because while I have been researching the benefits and risks with student data, specifically, as a parent and citizen, I am disallowed from providing no consent to data sharing of my child's personal property, of my own family personal property, our information that's collected in education records that then become data. I am disallowed from any procedure to opt out of the data sharing agreements that are allowed under FERPA. And I would love for this committee to consider researching how FERPA has changed in law and provisions, because FERPA used to protect our children's information, and today the code is mainly about exposing our kids' data without our knowledge or consent. So although Utah Code is telling us exactly what I've been trying to get across for 2 years, is
Ms.
that there
Massey?
are risks. Yes, sir.
Ms. Massey, we're actually at the 2-minute and 38-second mark. If you could
Okay.
just spend 10 or 15 seconds to wrap up your public comment, thank you.
I would just request that this committee consider a ad hoc committee or opening up all of those data advisory groups so that we can begin to talk about the risks that parents see, that we are disallowed from protecting our kids' information, and studies is one of them. I wholly object to my children and my family's information being shared for any study, but yet I'm disallowed from opting out of that study. And so I just request that we open up those meetings for committee work.
Thank you, Ms. Massey.
Thank you for your time.
So our next item on the agenda is 1.5.1 R277-114, corrective action and withdrawal or reduction of program funds. This is a repeal and reenactment. And Deputy Stallings, do we have anyone to speak to this?
We do. Thank you, Chair Carey. Tracy Nuttall, if you'd like to come up to the table here, I'll actually provide a bit of an introduction. So the agenda items are structured a little differently in Civic Clerk today. There's a 1.5, which includes a general overview, which we'd like to go through some slides. Then we will move to the rules, if that's okay, Chair Carey.
Sure, yes.
And so will start, let me just see if I can start the slideshow so it looks, let's see how it looks. Yeah, perfect. And then I will introduce Ms. Nuttall and kind of give a little bit of an overview of this project and the work and what we'll be presenting to you today before we get into the rule. So, and good morning, everyone. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And a couple of years ago, first off, it started with an audit from the Office of the Legislative Auditor General, who provided an audit on reporting requirements and made some recommendations and findings on the state board to have a comprehensive list of reports. Also, shortly after that audit, the Standards and Assessment Committee was reviewing the assurances, the annual assurances document, which is about 25 or 27 pages long of legal requirements and assurances, and made a request to ask staff to reduce that assurances document to only those things that were legally required. And then shortly after the Standards and Assessment Committee, I made a request for carry forward funds because board members were interested in compiling a master list of legal requirements. And the board approved carry forward funding for me to contract with ultimately Ms. Nuttall. We did an RFP process and she did win the award. Tracy Nuttall and I have actually known each other for some time. We both previously served as Associate General Counsel in for the legislature in education. And as I have mentioned before, when Tracy, we were not in education at the same time. So I was an attorney in education. And then once I left, Tracy worked in that area. But while Tracy was in that area, she supported the legislature in a recodification of the education code from 53A to 53E, F, and G. So she has some really great organizational skills, which we have really appreciated. So in just a minute, we'll explain kind of the phases of the project, but the reporting requirements audit, there was another audit by the Office of Legislative Auditor General on public education governance. And so in many ways, this phase 2 or this oversight framework responds to the findings of the Office of the Legislative Auditor General on clarifying oversight roles between, because we do have the legislature, we have the state board, and then we have school districts and charter schools, and we have charter school authorizers all in that space of governance. And the audit did speak to a request to clarify those roles or make it easier for people to know what to expect as far as governance and oversight. So this, in general, before I turn the time over to Tracy, this oversight framework is a transparency tool. It's a way for people to understand the board and what the board's oversight is going to look like. And when I say oversight, that's kind of the umbrella term. The subcategories of oversight are monitoring, assurances, reporting, et cetera. And we also are excited about this project to hopefully be a way of discussing the USB's role of oversight. So it may come a time where we have a certain program and policymakers do not agree with the existing oversight level. And that would be an opportunity to say, is this, in terms Chair Moss uses, too tight or too loose? Then it gives us a framework and a way to speak about it so that we're all clear about the expectations of what USBE, either staff or even in some ways the board, what that role is. So I think I've provided enough of an introduction. I'm excited about this project. This has been something we've been working on for a number of months. I think it's a unique thing. We're unaware of other states that have something like this. And it is in a lot of ways the board stating in a board rule how we are structured, how the board wants to structure their oversight in general. And then as you'll hear in a moment, we staff have created, have gone through all of the programs and requirements and specifically the rules and designated each rule a preliminary category. But those categories will later be codified by the board through individual board rules. So right now it's just a starting point list. So Ms. Nuttall, if it's okay with you, Chair, if we could turn the time to her.
Yeah, Deputy Solons, I had to say, it's like you read my mind because when I read who we're going to hear from next, I asked myself, I wonder where this came from. Like, what other state is doing this? And you just answered that. So thank you. Please.
Okay. Here we go. All right. Thanks. I'm Tracy Nuttall. As Angie mentioned, she did a great introduction. I don't want to take up too much of your time today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in, but Angie will probably be making a few comments. I'm kind of the fast one, and Angie's going to help flesh it out a little bit as I go along. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today. This is a unique recommendation that the board probably doesn't hear as much, and Angie gave you some of the background on that project. So I won't go too much further into that, but we're excited to share this with you. So the Master Legal Requirements Project that Angie just described, really the overarching goal of that is to provide better access to legal requirements to LEAs and the public education community. And what we're going to talk about today is specific to phase 2, but I'll just tell you, we've been working on phase 1, which will culminate in an updated administrative rules website that integrates the rules with all other kinds of resources, statutes, model policies, which I hear is a bad word sometimes. The staff that actually executes that rule, all sorts of things that would look kind of like the legislature's website. When you get into an individual bill, it would look kind of like that for each rule. So that's what we're trying to do. And it's really the foundation for other things that are coming later as well. But if you can keep in mind that what we're trying to do is really give everybody better access to legal requirements. So phase 2 that we're here to talk about today is to possibly create the oversight framework if the board decides to do that. And along with that is to simplify the assurances document. And then phase 3, which we haven't begun yet, has more to do with legislative strategy. So we can move on to the next slide.
Well, I have a question. I was just ready to ask the chair if I could. Yeah, so my question is, are we done with phase 1? Is there a website with updated rules?
So that has to do partly with the overall website of USB that's getting done right now. But we did sort of take a little pause in the summer to run the working group on phase 2, and also just because we're in pause a little bit because of USB's website. Did you want to add anything to that, Angie?
I'd be happy to. So some of you may have heard, but we're actually in the process of a complete redesign of our website. And so we are preparing, and Tracy's done a lot of work to organize and collect the information that ultimately will be on the administrative rules portion of the website, but that will be launched, I believe, January 1, 2024 is the expected date, and the administrative rules portion, we're hoping to have also this new organization and redesign also be in effect beginning January 1. Because it's so new and we have the staff we have, and we haven't been able to start populating it, we're not sure of the time commitment. We have considered, if needed, potentially hiring some time-limited, short-time employees to help with like data entry that would be needed for the website redesign. But that is the goal right now, is January 1, 2024.
But Chair, and I don't know if we're supposed to turn these on or no, or
We have to for the.
okay. It is true that there are updated rules. I think the updated rules site on the website now is better than it's been for years. I really appreciate that there is the updated rules website right when you go to USBE. The integration part is probably what you're talking about working on, but
correct.
I think we all should be clear to the public that there's an excellent administrative rules website. Right, used to have to go through 3 or 4 steps to get to it. Now it's very accessible.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. And if I may add, sorry, do you mind if I add? Yes, the website has so much more information, historical research ability there than it did, say, even 4 years ago. Sybil Child and former employee Michelle Miller did a lot of work to do that. It was when Sybil was actually in Kieran, she was the legal assistant, and she really was the lead on that project. What the next step will be is to take, right now, a lot of the information, the same information is already there on our website. It's just a little harder to find. There's a lot of different tabs you have to go through to get to it. So what we're hoping is to have for each rule a landing page that would include the 2 or 3 staff members that you could contact if you had questions about the rule, the sections of code that relate to that rule, any guidance documents, training information, a link to a website, say if there's a more robust website not website, but web page within the USBE website that provides more information. And also that page will include historical versions of the rule to a certain point. So we have on our website, I believe up to about 2018 or maybe as far back as 2016, you can find previous versions of the rule and see how the board has amended that over time. And so that information, instead of being under the rule records tab, which is where it's at right now, the hope is to have that all on one page. And we really use the legislature's page, what they do for a bill. You'll see like they have fiscal note information, they have the sponsors, they have the name of the drafting attorney, they have the name, they have sections of code listed there. And that's what we're hoping is to do a one-stop page for each rule instead of people having to go to multiple different pages on our website to find the same information. It's really going to be a tool that school district and charter schools will be able to more easily navigate, and members of the public should be able to find information much more quickly once we get to that space than they can now.
Thank you. Ms. Nuttall, please.
Thanks. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So what is a board oversight framework? So really, it's actually quite simple. It's just an organizational system for programs and requirements that indicates USBE's current oversight role. And I'll say more in a minute. But we're just going to kind of start broad and get narrower. So it consists of 4 categories with increasing levels of USBE oversight. But why do we need it? What we think is that the benefits of the framework would be just to have a lot of transparency about what current USBE practice is for each given program, and an ability to thin out the assurances document for programs that are already fully monitored and don't need additional assurance. And we also think benefits accrue to LEAs who will better understand local responsibilities. So what I'm saying is, if you can say to somebody in the education community, that's a Category 3 program, then and I'll explain in a minute, you would know, oh, there's monitoring involved with that. And we know where corrective action would be on that. There's not so many factors within the framework, but it gives us a direction that you can say in one program, you say, this one phrase, and then people have an understanding quite quickly of where it kind of goes into the whole USBE system. We just know, and also that we can kind of compare the characteristics of different programs with this. So we'll get into that. And also, I just think, like I was saying, it kind of creates this language just for people to talk about across we have so many players in the education community, and just even to be able to talk to the legislative auditors with a system like this would be really great, we think. So that's
Tracy, may I also, something that you stated that we kind of learned, this oversight framework was not actually something that when I contracted with Tracy, we even had on our radar. But as Tracy was going through the legal requirements, she found that sometimes it's not clear who is actually required to do something, because the language is so broad that it could be the teacher, it could be the district, it could be USBE. And so this also came as a result of that, and as a way to clarify those roles.
That's right. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. So categories 1 and 2, we kind of have them divided up into 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So we'll see. So on categories 1 and 2, it would mean there's no dedicated staff for that program. There's no monitoring. And typically we like to call these local control. Complaints are going to be referred back to LEAs. And for here, there is support from USBE, but a lot of the support will come in the form of the new rules website that we've been talking about, that we're like, okay, here's all the resources you need. All the legal requirements are here, but it's local control. So it's really more for LEAs to get on there, find out what the requirements are, and then go ahead and implement those on their own. And then the differences between Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 is pretty much all local control, really no USBE resources. And we'll get into a couple examples in a minute. Category 2 would be like some minor USBE support, but again, no dedicated staff for that. So we can move on. So for categories 3 and 4, we're going to see dedicated staff here. We're going to see monitoring, and then the frequency and the type of the monitoring is going to determine whether it's 3 or 4. And then we're also going to see staff-driven corrective action. And so again, the differences between category 3 and 4 would be On category 3, we're going to see less frequent monitoring, and desk monitoring. And in category 4, we're going to see annual or more frequent, and we're going to see on-site visits. Those are kind of the characteristics that we've come up with. So we
Sure, can I
move
ask a question?
Please,
I also?
please.
And so it may be, you may be going through this, but where would like just plain training be? Because I think everywhere I go, I see USBE training at every single level, conferences with that. Because I know this is about monitoring, but at the same time, resources. It takes travel, it takes people, it takes hours. How do you differentiate between training and monitoring?
It would kind of probably depend on the level of training. It's really going to be different for each rule individual, but I think like a low level training could definitely be in category 2. But again, in categories 3 and 4 with the monitoring, you're also going to see also related resources. And I think you're going to see a lot of training as part of the monitoring process in that. Would you add anything to that, Angie?
Yes, and I would just say that training would be more likely and more robust in a category 3 or 4 program. So like we have Director Chalice here, student data privacy, I believe we have that categorized as a 4. And that they do a lot of training. They provide a lot of training and a lot of technical assistance, not only to school districts and charter schools, but parents often contact our staff with questions about student data privacy issues. School fees, there's training available, but because it's now moved to a category 3, as opposed to the 3 years it was a category 4, their training is available, and there's information, but it's not going to be as often or as maybe proactive as a category 4 program. And there we do have some instances though of training occurring in category 1 and 2. It's just less likely. It's more likely to be in category 3 or 4.
So let me show you some,
Board Member Lear. Yeah.
My question was so similar to Leanne's, my mind to your mind. Oh, my mic, sorry. Yes, anyway, my question was very similar. And I would kind of added about training and how is training a part of this. I would maybe add a request as you're still doing this work and building this, that as you look at the monitoring requirements in 3 and 4, and they're more, and we would probably say robust, others would say intense, others would say intrusive, that we also comparatively add training that matches that. Because I really, really, really bothered with some rules we've been looking at recently that are getting broader and deeper and more punitive, and there is zero training. And so I'm desperately hoping that those things will come together and not, yes, we're going to add all this deep, thorough, intrusive penalties, but we're not doing any training. Yes, we'll do the training eventually. I hope they come at the same time.
To your point, Board Member Lear, I want to give an example of a program that I think is very fresh in some of our minds, especially yours and mine, of an example of a program that was a category 1/2, probably a category 2 program, which was school fees. It was a category 2 program after some audits. It moved to a category 4 program for 3 years. There were 3 dedicated staff. 2 staff had been they're reprioritized from internal audit staff to work on this project for 3 years. And then there was some time limited funds used to hire a time limited employee. The reason I'm bringing that up is during those 3 years, the focus was on training, model policies, guides on how an LEA could go through their own process of establishing their system of control or their policy. There really was no corrective action in those first years. It was really about support to compliance, meaning first we have to give the information on the standard of compliance and what to look for. And the staff really focused on providing resources and help and assistance to the LEAs so they could come into compliance. And then after those 3 years, because we didn't have any dedicated staff before those audits, it was a local control program, we went to the legislature and said, this is where we're at. Look at all that we have done as an agency to support this effort. What would you like the oversight to look like moving forward? And we provided 3 options of 1, 2, or 3 staff and said, depending on the number of staff, here's the level of monitoring and oversight. The legislature funded 1 FTE, and we do now have Barbie Faust, who is the school fees specialist. And so that is a Category 3 program. And there is monitoring occurring, but it means when you have 1 versus 3, that LEAs are going to be monitored perhaps every 5 to 7 years versus every 1 or 2 years. So to your point, I think our staff are very much have the mindset of support to compliance. You'll see in special ed, for example, a lot of effort goes to providing trainings, answering questions. I know that they meet with special ed directors at least quarterly, I believe. So yes, all USBE staff, you might be surprised, they don't come here to enter into corrective action plans and hold people, to make them like feel bad for non-compliance. Our USBE staff, they love providing that training and support to help LEAs get to what right looks like.
And brief follow-up, Chair. I agree, and the school fees example is an excellent one. I really became more comfortable with the 25-page school fees rule once that we were told over and over that there were no penalties in the first 3 years. Would that every program were like that we did all that training before the penalties were imposed. And that's, unfortunately, that's not, I don't think, the common pattern. And I hope maybe that's where we're moving going forward, because I think that is a very excellent example. Thank you. Thanks for your comments too and explanations.
Board Member Hart, you.
Yeah, what I like is, and it's somewhat tangentially related. We like to add training to schools and to teachers, but it's often not obvious how much training is required. And at this point, the amount of training far exceeds the number of minutes I have as a practitioner to offer that training to require that training. I can fill training, I think last I counted, at least 3 full days prior to school starting without any time in those classrooms for teachers. So what I'm hoping with this kind of framework is that becomes obvious so that we make better decisions about how we're taking teachers' time. So a framework like this can make certain things clearer that kind of were hidden in the data. Because you always, of course, we need to train. The problem is when it's not obvious how much training or what training we're already doing, then it's easy to say, well, let's add this one. So I'm hoping this framework helps in a variety of areas, not just clarifying oversight, but also clarifying some additional elements in that are put through in code and rule. So I think the benefits are beyond even recording or reporting. I'm sorry. I think it offers a multitude of benefits. So just something to think about as we're developing out the framework, how we can clarify and report on many things, not just that, although that is the primary focus and we cannot lose that focus. So thank you.
We usually let the presenter get through their presentation before questions, but there's a lot of excitement and questions. So, but please, if you want to continue.
I'm going to take it as a compliment. So, and I love this feedback because I'll just pause for a minute and say that my vision of what we're presenting to you today is that we're giving you this beginning of a framework, because really the board should be the one to develop it. We've tried to give you kind of the very bare bones framework, and we would love to see the board develop that. As the board makes categorizations of all the rules and new things come out and you see like this is working, and then it's kind of tough right now with the categorizations because we're categorizing things that were in existence before the framework. But as you make new rules and you realize we want to make a rule that is basically a category 2 rule, and then you can have some consistency throughout your rules if you like that. So I'm excited to see where the board would take the framework in the future. We've just tried to kind of like find some very fundamental characteristics that work in the different categories. And so let me give you a couple examples of the what's in the categories. I'm a little hesitant on these. Angie can attest to this. I feel nervous about sharing what we've categorized because it really is the board's job to do the categorizations. What we've done is we've tried to work with staff to see if we think this is going to work based on what we do and to pull out those common characteristics. And so when you see these examples, nothing is set in stone. There's nothing actually in the rule that says which program is in which category. That's the job for the board to do if they decide to adopt this framework. And then I'll explain to you how we've kind of envisioned that will work for the board. So you can just see a couple of these for category 1, things like school district boundaries, LEA employment, taxation. These are things that would be referred back to LEA's local control. Category 2, again, LEA codes of conduct, RESAs, teacher student success program. That one's a little controversial. Some people in the legislature think it's in a different category maybe, and yet the law kind of tells us no, that would be in category 2. So those are just some examples, and I'll let you look at those, and then we can look at the next slide too. That is the 3 and 4.
Tracy, before you move on to 3 and 4, if I could just make a comment about why Tracy stated that it's a bit controversial, the Teacher and Student Success Program. It's not controversial in the program's great. It's a fabulous program. I think when Tracy mentions controversy, this is where I think this framework is going to be very helpful. When you look at the Teacher Student Success Act and that program, LEAs would say they think it's actually a category 1, it's local control. And actually when that bill was passed, and interestingly, Tracy and I had a very unique view of when that bill passed. She was the drafter of that program. I was in my role now. And I remember our agency asking for staff. When that bill came out, we said, if you'd like us to oversee this, we need staff. And we were told, no, this is a local control program. However, recently there was an audit from the state auditor's office that indicated that they expected USBE to be at almost like a category 4 and telling LEAs what they can and can't do with their TSSA funds. And essentially saying there were some LEAs that were identified as perhaps not following the law, as closely as they could have. And so then the question is, who makes that LEA do what, some believe the law should be? And USBE said, well, we don't have staff. We don't have a monitoring program. We don't provide training on this. So that's really not our role, because we were told when this bill passed that it was local control. Well, now when TSSP or the next version of a new program comes forward, the legislature can be very clear about what they put in the language of the bill. And when they decide not to dedicate staff to fund staff, they will know really you are now looking at a category 1 or 2 program, and then that the board will likely in board rule categorize it as a 1 or 2, not as a 3 or 4, because we don't have those dedicated staff. So that's just an example of something that provides transparency. So all players, LEAs, USBE, the legislature, and those who audit can be on the same page.
Isn't there there's a lot of overlap in these issues, and I know these are just ideas in the making, right? This isn't set in stone, but we just had a long discussion, arguably too long, on electronic devices in public schools yesterday. And we have that as a category 1 here, but what if that phone is used to bully someone else? and that bullying is in a category 2 or category 3. How will you get to how you're parsing these, or how we're identifying which category they should fall into?
Well, what we've done is tried to focus on if it's the rule that it's in. So we would categorize the rule. That's kind of the unit of measurement that the board has, that we're kind of emphasizing that on the website and then emphasizing that in categories. But there are other things too, like contracts and other things that will be categorized. And so that it will be a bit of a work in progress. Did you have?
I was just gonna say, since it was a bullying incident, that would probably be a category 3. I can't remember if we've got our bullying prevention rule in 3 or 4, but we do have dedicated staff at USBE. So the bullying itself or that incident would be over in category 3, but how LEAs choose to have devices on their campus or not, or how they use them as part of their instruction practices. I think what we're trying to say is that's really more, that's a category 1 issue.
And Chair, not to belabor that example, but it is a good example of what we were also just talking about, where I like category 1. I think even the bullying could be addressed by the LEA. And we have zero that I know of training about using electronic devices in public schools that's available for LEAs. So that's one where I'd say if it moves to a 2 or 3, then I think it's very incumbent upon the USB to have training optional, to Molly's point earlier. That's not forced, but if we have intense monitoring of a 3 or 4 level, then we should have very good training of a 3 or 4 level. That's optional for LEA. So we're don't have a disproportionate punish. Good luck with telling LEAs and particularly personnel how to do this right.
So would this in essence help us in rule writing? So if it came in as a category 1, like yesterday, we could say, you know what, we actually don't have a lot of oversight over this. Let's simplify, let it move on, and we don't spend hours on a rule micromanaging that in the end we won't do anything with afterwards.
Correct. So when that rule, let's say that this 114 had passed and the oversight framework was in place, and that electronic device rule came up for its 5-year review. That is why it was before you yesterday. It was up for its 5-year review. We would then say in there what category. So staff would have said, based on all the elements that we're aware of here at USBE, we believe it's a category 1 program, and then the board would discuss that. And if the board did want to move it to category 2, you could say, well, are these elements in place? Or if it was they wanted it to be a category 3 or then we would say, well, we probably either need to repurpose staff from one effort to another, or we may need to ask the legislature for additional FTE. Or a third option would be to ask the staff to do a 3-year quote unquote project, like the school fees project, where you take carry forward resources, the one-time funding, to have dedicated staff for 2 to 3 years to say support in that area, and then move the oversight back to category 1 or 2. So there are options. There will be limited options because, again, we have the staff we have, and so unless we're going to remove them from working on one thing, that's why I think electronic devices by design would be a category 1.
Chair, I have another. I noticed the time, and I feel like we have enough time to discuss this. Is that true?
It is.
I don't want to take time from something else we shouldn't. But, and with that, I may have forgotten what I wanted to say about it. And this is getting down into the weeds. But I'm assuming, using our really excellent, very recent example, if someone wanted to move it, or if a board member proposed to move it to a different category, I'm assuming we would receive advice that we shouldn't move it to that category till we have those elements in place. And I'm sort of repeating what was said, but those elements I'm hoping would include training. We have no training available. So we shouldn't move it to category 3 until we have training that's available. And I'm hoping that the board would be receptive to that staff advice.
Can I ask a clarifying question? What we would be putting in this framework, however, would be what are we including rules in this? Maybe I totally missed that.
Yes,
They're in rules.
the rules will codify the category that the board believes matches.
Right,
Yeah.
but we're doing this work on the things that legislature passes.
Yes, although some of our rules are things that the board has chosen to enact on their own. I'm trying to think.
And
of
so
an
we're
example.
including those. This isn't
Mhm.
just to clarify legislative intent. It is also to clarify the board's intent.
Correct. And actually,
You know, I totally missed that until just now, because to me, it's a communication tool from the legislature to the board to clarify that boundary.
Mhm.
I'm just now
It
I'm
is
thinking
that
aloud,
as well.
and now
Yeah.
I'm also realizing it has that whole other dimension. Okay.
It's both.
right,
I mean,
thank
it
you.
is about the expectation setting between the legislature and the board.
Yeah.
It's also about expectation setting between the board and staff,
Okay.
between the board and LEAs.
Okay.
So it
Yeah.
really is the board. It's your exercise of your general control and supervision, your not only constitutional but statutory right to set minimum standards and to oversee and monitor. That's you being able to say to the whole governance system, it's a transparency tool and a
Okay.
conversation tool. So
Okay.
it can be used in many ways.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for indulging my think aloud.
Reality check. Say.
We got 5 minutes further into your presentation.
We're doing good. Well, I only have 9 slides, and so we're good. We're actually almost done with the slides, and then we can get into the rule. But everything that I've heard as far as feedback, it shows me that you're catching the vision and that we're actually going to get into some of these questions that you're bringing up as we go along. So I'm excited. I feel like everything's very like we're moving together as a group. So it's great. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. This is just some more examples of possible categorizations that you probably are familiar with. I don't know at what point, we actually do have a spreadsheet to show you the categorizations. And I'll just tell you a little bit of the background. So we had staff go in and do categorizations for us. And then we kind of wrote the rule a little bit. And then we went back and talked to staff and asked them to kind of look at it again. And so it is, and I still consider it a work in progress, but just so you can see, we needed to do that awkward chicken and egg, like back and forth to kind of pull out these components and do our best to get these characteristics for you. So,
Sorry, for some reason, I'm not able to get this solstice thing if I close it, it'll stop me sharing. Let me see oh, there we go. Got it. Sometimes I just
Just make that a little bigger. Enter.
Yep.
Can you do it in both screens? Oh, you got it clear back there, but not there.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
so
Is that better?
This is a long PDF, and the first part is just a list of rules with the category number next to them. If you go down, so if you just take one of these that's shorter, you'll see, so I think this is the original one. So this has all the categories, and I actually added a category 5 because outside of the framework are rules that just have to do with the board that don't have to do with any oversight duties. It's just board related. Oh yeah. So here would be all the category 1s. Here would be all the category 2s. And then I did the next one, I think is 1 and 2 together. So you can kind of get an idea of that. And then again, there's 3, 4, and then 3 and 4. So
3 and then 4.
Out of curiosity, not holding you to anything.
Are they in?
They're a little bit divided. A couple are in tier 2, and sorry, we originally called them tiers. A couple are in category 2, and the more restrictive ones are in category 3, I believe.
So you can see 217 right there is in 3, and some of them.
So there should be commensurate training then with the, if what we just said would be.
And I would say one thing that's going to be different about some of these are not going to be as clean, meaning because the categories were not in place when these programs were established, because the category training could be to the LEA and not the educator, right? Oftentimes training of educators is done by the LEA. I understand UPAC is a bit unique. But mostly USBE's oversight is directly to the LEA, not directly to an educator. It's up to the LEA to then train the educator. But I do understand how UPAC is different because the oversight on the license is direct from USBE or UPAC directly to the educator. So that is just a unique program where normally the default would be any training we provide would be to the LEA, like a district or a charter school staff person, like their data privacy person or their school fees person or their special ed director or their curriculum director. We don't, in fact, I'm really unaware of any space where we provide training directly to educators unless requested by the district or charter.
And the point, I hope we rethink that.
And one way to accomplish that might be for the board to develop some sort of a training module that LEAs could then give to their educators. And I know you and I were part of that UPAC task force years ago. And one of the recommendations from that UPAC task force, I believe, was actually to receive funding to ask the legislature to fund a modular, a training system for LEAs or for, and it didn't go anywhere, but yeah. Yeah.
Ms. Nuttall.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to hopefully finish up the slideshow real quick. We can go to the next slide. I think it's slide 8.
That spreadsheet.
We've been lucky to have staff be very responsive and helpful. In fact, yeah, it's been a team effort. This is absolutely, I had a feeling at the beginning of the summer, you can't do this by yourself. We've needed all staff to give their feedback and get down to the, to the very bottom level of detail. So yeah, it's been amazing. I've been so grateful, and USB staff is awesome to work with. I've worked with different staffs. USB is great. Okay, so just a couple things on what the framework is not. It's not an opportunity right now in 114 to make changes to level of oversight for a particular program. And I think that we've had some discussion about that, and you understand that. It also doesn't commit the legislature to anything. It's really just this tool to show the related characteristics of public education programs. And it's kind of nice because the legislature can hop on board with the categories if they want. If they don't, the board could still say, okay, thank you for handing that down. Now we're going to go ahead and organize that, and we're going to show where things are going to go. So even if they don't jump on, I think it's a really helpful tool. But if they do, it'd be nice to get some of that up in, code, not the framework per se, but like some of the characteristics that the drafting attorneys up the legislature can actually put in some of these like training and monitoring characteristics. That's what I mean. Sorry, that's getting too far ahead.
You said that. It almost goes to that legislative strategy, which it was mentioned on a slide, but we haven't entered into that space because, again, we don't want to bind or assume that the legislature is going to be super as excited about it as we are. But the idea is, as Tracy said, there's kind of 2 steps to that quote unquote, I guess, legislative strategy. One would be to see if the legislature would like to codify what I would imagine would be a simple statement directing the board to establish an oversight framework that we would do in board rule, which is what we have. The second kind of level of that legislative strategy is us working with the drafting attorneys to identify the words that they could use in code to signal category 1 versus category 3 versus category 4. So that then when a bill is drafted, a program is drafted, and the legislator is like, yes, I want this, this, and this, and yes, I'm going to fund that. Then when it comes time to fiscal note it, it will be a very simple process because the legislator would have had kind of this menu of 1, 2, 3, 4, and even under each of the categories, kind of a menu of what that looks like. It would actually be a tool for them to make sure that the board and staff and even LEAs know what the USBE's role will be moving forward.
Just a quick question on level 1. Do we maintain rules for level 1 programs because maybe they're state driven or just because of our general control and supervision? Like in some of those, I'm sure there are category 1 things that we don't have rules for, or am I
Correct.
wrong?
No, you're correct. And we do have category 1 and 2 programs we do have rules for. Sometimes it's because the legislature directs us to establish rules.
Okay,
And
that's helpful.
sometimes it's because after a law is passed, there's ambiguity. And so the LEAs come to us and say, we don't know. I'm trying to think of something that's an example of this. There's these early learning software, reading software programs, and the legislature passed the program. And after the program passed, there were some things it asked USBE to do, but one of the terms of fidelity. What does it mean? How many minutes does that mean? What does it mean? Because if the LEAs weren't using those tools with fidelity, then we were supposed to take the licenses away from them. So it wasn't something that explicitly the legislature asked us to do, but we found we had to get more clarity on that before we were going to pull licenses. So we then clarify. So an example of a rule that I have used this in areas where we've talked, we have open and dual enrollment and dual enrollment. That's where a district can say, you know, our high school has the capacity to enroll an additional 100 or 150 students that may not reside within the boundary of our district. And so it might be that a Canyon School District student really wants to go to a Jordan School District school or Salt Lake City school. But that is discretionary up to the LEA to decide to open that up. We do not have a dedicated staff person over open enrollment. We don't monitor that, but we do have a rule on open enrollment that establishes some timeline standards, like you need to do this by February 1, you need to open it up, you know, or let families know by this date. So, and what that looks like in practical terms as far as like what does USBE staff role look like? Well, first of all, it's creating that rule, supporting you all in creating those clear guidelines in rule. But then second, we do get quote unquote complaints from parents who are navigating the open enrollment process. And sometimes it's just questions. They just need to know, I want to attend ABC school in ABC district. What do I do? And we might say, well, here you go to their website. They should have this information. And we had an example of, and I don't want, I'm not going to name the district, but we did have a parent who happened to also be an educator who was a teacher in a district. She resided outside of the district where she taught. She wanted her student to participate in open enrollment and enroll in the same district where she taught. They had a school open for open enrollment, and the teacher was told her students did not qualify. So she contacted our office and said, I've been told by my district that my kids do not qualify to participate in open enrollment, and we couldn't see anything in law that would allow that. Or, you know, and so we contacted, just informal, contacted the district, and then the attorney for the district contacted us to ask some questions, and they changed their policy. So that's an example of things where it's just informal conversations, and sometimes either districts, you know, they just don't know that that is maybe a policy that was old, or maybe it's what a principal understands a policy to be, but they may not know that actually district's policy is this. So that happens informally. I'm sure that Debbie, Audit Director Debbie Davis, her staff do that a lot. And we've received reports how the education hotline, I think 90-something% of those are referred back to the LEA, and the LEA resolves them. And so, and that would be the presumption in categories 1 and 2. Although we have a rule, it's often just because the legislature either asks us to supplement. So another example, in the Teacher Student Success Act, after they passed the law, one of the things that needed to be defined was an average, the statewide average district salary, like, or average, not just district, but charter salary. We came up with a defined term to explain how we were going to calculate that, because if an LEA's average teacher salary was at one point, they were able to use more money for one thing than another, if that makes sense. So it's another example of where we, again, don't have dedicated staff, we're not monitoring, but we might have a rule that just supplements what the legislature has.
Does that answer your question, Board Member Lear?
Are you worried? Are you concerned? Maybe you've thought about this already, that this will be weaponized, to use the common parlance, that all of a sudden somebody's going to say, wait, you've got this in category 3, and like I am, where's your training? Or where's your staff? Or where's your something else? Are you worried that it could be used in that way as opposed to just to help us address problems?
Board Member Lear, I have a very similar question. Can we hold off until the presentation's done?
Sure.
Would that be okay? Just because I think that takes us in a different direction, and I'd like to get through this and then open it up just to any question.
Okay. Okay, and so finally, what the framework is not, it doesn't define or control an LEA's specific oversight. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so you'll see this in the rule, but there's kind of 3 steps to this process. So first of all, and in the rule, we've given the board a 5-year window to complete the categorizations, because all the rules have to be reviewed within a 5-year period. So first of all, the superintendent will analyze the requirements, the risk, and the resources relating to the program. And second of all, based on that analysis, the superintendent will categorize the program based I already said that, based on the analysis. And then third, which is most important, is memorialize, that the results will go into the related rule. We're not going to have a separate rule that says which rule is in which category, but it will go in the rule itself, which I think goes to Board Member Lear's a couple of related feedback items that she's had. It's nice because it all goes in there at the same time. So when the categorization happens, the board can also consider, are the trainings in there? Is the monitoring in there? And that, I think, will cut down on some of that concern that it all gets reviewed at the same time and within a normal process that the board is already doing at the same time. So we've tried to cut back on anything extraneous here and to make it as efficient as possible. And then you'll see this in the draft language also. It's not just the categorization, but also category-specific oversight, objectives and duties, any implemented monitoring system. We actually worked really hard with audit to get some language into the draft rule that helps us to say from the get-go about, well, what internal control system is USB going to have in place that kind of matches the category and that kind of thing. So we can get that into that in the draft language in a minute. And then finally, my last slide is, so what's going to happen if you decide to pass it out if the committee decides to pass out the draft today, the board will consider amendments to 114 and minor amendments to 100. The board, if that happens, then the board would go on, categorize existing rules. Actually, this is an old language. We've quote unquote preliminarily categorize existing rules. Then we'll simplify assurances document to the legally required assurances. And then the board would embark on this 5-year process of analyzing and categorizing programs and requirements. So that officially completes the presentation, and then we can take a look at some draft language if you like.
Thank you. I'd turn the time, Board Member Lear's question, if she would like to, if you were able to answer that question now, that would be great.
I have another.
Plugged in, so
okay. I will say about the weaponization, yes, we are concerned. We've tried to think through lots of different scenarios of how the framework could be used this way and that way. And honestly, yes, I think there's always the possibility that it could be used for ill and not for good. But we hope that the benefits of it would just outweigh that, and that we could address those issues as they come up.
If I can, apparently Chair Carey has some other thoughts about that too, but my concern would be, and I don't know if I'm
going down my own bird walk, but that if something comes up and there's an LEA that has a problem, the board wants to monitor or withhold funds or something, and the LEA says, well, look at this category 3, you were supposed to provide training and you didn't. And I keep perseverating about that. I don't mean to, but you were supposed to have staff for this and you didn't. And so, does that somehow negate our bad acts I don't think I agree with you. And I really appreciate your answer. We just feel like we need to go through with this and then see how it develops and then address the problems. But I can see that happening. And, if it turned into something in a legal battle, being able to use that to the detriment of the board, if we're not very careful to have the necessary components that go along with especially the more draconian penalties.
Deputy Stallings, do you want to?
I was just going to add that I think to some extent, some of that already occurs even without this rule, because there's not clarity. Like an example is the recent audit on Teacher Student Success Act, where it was asked, why don't you have corrective action plans? Why are you not out there monitoring? Why are you not taking funds from LEAs? So in a lot of ways, that is already happening. It's just we don't have a framework that's clear to then allow policymakers to have that discussion of, okay, here's the audit. Staff aren't doing anything here. And why is that? And it could be, I'm going to admit there could be things that we as staff are doing wrong and we can do better. But it might be that staff was not expecting they had to do that. And if that is the desire, like school fees. School fees is an example of, after those audits, the board was very much chastised and told, you need to do your job. Why aren't you doing this? How did you let this go out of control? And we're like, well, we thought this was local control. We didn't realize you wanted us to start taking people's money. And anyway, you get my point. It already happens, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
And I think Tracy's point of
Board Member Wood?
I think to some extent, this is a benefit to us and to LEAs. Because if we are trying to put a corrective action plan in place and we've not supported them in any way, then we're all left. Yeah, it puts everybody in a bad light. So here we're being very transparent in, here are the requirements. Here's how we're going to support you. Here's what, and also I loved in the oversight committee we had the other day where they talked about putting it into the new book, so that shows the one that comes out right after the legislature, is that here's the LEAs immediately can go flag those things that, oh, we are in charge of these things. Because I think I would be surprised if there isn't some element anytime there comes a law to kind of sit back as an LEA and wait to see, well, what is the board going to do? What is this? And now they will see immediately if we can get legislative buy-in to this, that, oh, this is us. We have to determine what we're going to do with that.
May I just add the one caveat, because I've been thinking through a piece of feedback. So this presentation was made to a group in the oversight focus group last week. And a piece of feedback we received from LEAs is, when new bills pass, we do a bill summary every session right after, and we say, here's the rules we anticipate amending, and one of the requests was to designate the category. Now, it would have to be a draft, because it would really be up to the board and the staff together to do that once the rule came related to that program. And so maybe we can do that, but it would maybe say something like, this is subject to board approval or further an update, because sometimes that board book is done within about 3 to 4 weeks after the session, and we don't always know everything that just passed or exactly. We learn a lot over the 6 to 9 months after the session.
I just have a question. This is either for Ms. Nuttall or Deputy Stallings. I look at this, and maybe I'm looking at it incorrectly, but since I've been here, a lot of times there's sensitivity to, oversight control for education rests with the USBE, are we giving the opportunity to the legislature to dictate even more about education policy and the direction it should be going when we go to them and say, start categorizing this? Like, isn't that this body's role? And when we tell them or ask them or invite them for their input or keywords, are we really abdicating our constitutional role in that?
Well, if I may answer, I think that what this will do is, as the board is becomes familiar with the categories and their expectations, and a bill, let's say a bill is made public, and you see that the legislator wants to make something that's historically been very much local control, they want to make it a category 3 or 4, that would be the board's opportunity to then work with the legislator and say, we believe this is a local matter. And so we would actually, and I'm going to give an example that happened this last session. The early version of HB 427 by Representative Jimenez had some language that stated the state board shall ensure that LEAs, instructional materials, classroom, et cetera, are in compliance with this law. And when we looked at that, we thought we need 20 staff to start visiting all of the classrooms in 1,100 schools and see what books they're using, what instructional materials, what they're using on their board. That's just almost an impossible task, first of all. But second of all, is that what really people want? Do people really want USBE to set a standard of what every single classroom in the state looks like? And I think the answer to that was no. And so you saw Representative Jimenez change that language to providing an assurance. And so that came from, I will say, USBE board members and staff providing that feedback of, you may think you want the State Board of Education to quote unquote ensure and review instructional materials, but in general, that has historically been a local control area. We set standards and we pass rules, but it's really up to the locals to select their own instructional materials, decide the standards for like what's in their classroom and what they expect of their educators, if that makes sense. So if anything, I think these categories could have helped in that arena, and it does help us be clear together, like to work together as the legislature and the board to make sure we have that right balance of oversight. Because I do think in well-intentioned ways, many legislators probably don't necessarily understand the difference between USBE and LEA, and like they don't know the different, not all of them, some of them don't know the difference between a standard and an instructional material or curriculum. And in general, the default is the board sets graduation requirements and standards and licensings. But then at the local level, they do the hiring, they select the instructional materials, and they determine what met the credit for graduation. Do you see? So it's like there is a role for both in all of these areas, but there's one role that's very distinctly and uniquely best suited for USBE, and there's another role that's uniquely and best suited for the LEAs.
I also see an opportunity to diminish the voice of each individual board member. So as board members, we all meet individually, sometimes collectively, with different elected members. So if a board member now goes to a member of the legislature and says, hey, I've been to my district, I've talked to the superintendents, we have a real issue with electronic devices in the classroom, I would like you to sponsor legislation that would regulate that more intensely. Does USBE staff or another board member go to that same legislator and now say, well, actually, we have that as a category 1. This board member's opinion is out of line with the USBE's classification? Is that, I mean, I could see that happening.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. The categories.
I'm in the meeting. I just got leave on a high note.
Yes, you thought of something. But I do think it's a way for the board collectively to set a standard. And then, like you said, sometimes different board members might have different expectations, just like different legislators have different expectations.
And Chair, I actually see that as a plus opportunity for the board to act unitedly and collaborate better and not have board members realizing that if they do that on their own, I hope this will work in a way to, and I don't mean this using really the way that I'm sounding, but I can't think of a better word in the moment. I'm hoping it will help board members control themselves and say, this is really something we should discuss. This is not something that on my own I can promise or instigate, and I would be doing the board collectively and a disservice if I don't collaborate first and work with the board. I have another question eventually if you're through with this and imponderable thing.
I do have one follow-up to that, which would be so if this could be used as to represent the official position of USBE to a member of the legislature, to an LEA, where does the voice of the elected body come into play? So we have this list of categories that's been created. We're talking about possibly sending out a preliminary classification to LEAs following the legislative session. Where is the voice of these 15 people? How is that incorporated into the creation of these categories? And how would those categories be altered? Or how do we move a program from here to here or from here to here? Like, what is the thought process through that?
Yes, thank you. It will be as each program is discussed and as each rule comes forward and we do codify the category, that will be where the conversation, I believe, occurs. And it may also occur like when we are audited. So an example, we're audited on the Teacher and Student Success Act program. And we could bring up the rule and say, I really see our current categories, that draft list is almost like a draft rule. Staff does our best to start something, to bring something of quality, we hope. That's our first best draft. And then it's the boards. And actually, it's not just the boards, it's the public, because the public influences that, right? It becomes a product of primarily the board, but of the people as well. And so I did have a question from an LEA leader, a district leader, who said, we want to be involved in that process as well to help discuss what category is best. And I assured her that, again, 114 is not the time to do it. This is just to set up that framework, that structure, to provide the transparency and kind of the language, the tool to then do the work. It will be in the board rule process. There might be some things that come out in code or that come out from the legislature we don't do a rule on. Because like an example, we used to have a rule on what used to be called the waivers of participation, and then for different reasons that was repealed. And then, as you know, we brought forward a draft rule as a result of HB 348, and we were asked not to do that. And so that is an example of one where we might not have a definitive rule in place designating that category, but in some ways, maybe that in and of itself shows it's a category 1, right? It's really a local control opportunity for LEAs and families to work together as students and families opt to refrain. So.
Thank you, Deputy. Member Lear, you said you had additional questions.
Different question, different direction, kind of the opposite of the question you just asked. And I had heard, maybe I talked to the same local representative that you talked to, Angie, but I had a question about golly, we just really have some questions about this rule and we're not really, it sounded from the tone of, we're not really on board yet. So I'm wondering, maybe a two-part question. First, have you discussed this with the USBA, to use that example? And have you at least collaborated and addressed their questions, whether they're happy or not about it? That's a different.
So we have shared the framework. There were members of USBA and USSA in the focus group last week. We also shared this with USSA, so the Superintendent's Association leaders. USBA is a harder group to get in front of because they're local board members.
And
we
I
have to
really
be
meant
invited.
USSA.
Okay,
In your
yes.
pre-meeting for the board meeting, did you
Yes.
share this?
We did, yes, and we did, and actually charter. So we, as you know, we have a pre-meeting with representative groups of superintendents and charter directors, and we usually we go through the rules. We actually went through the slideshow with them as well and received feedback. And I will offer to anybody, of course, this is a public meeting.
Sure.
Just like we go to the legislature's committee meetings and we track it, anyone could be tracking this conversation and providing public comment or written comment. But we are also more than happy to attend, a USSA meeting, a USBA meeting, a charter directors meeting. We'd be happy to do that.
And what I was saying more, Angie, did you seem to address their concerns?
Yes.
Because we were not able to be in that meeting. And did you feel like they left that meeting saying, oh, because this leads me to my second part of my question. And then I'd love your response. And that is, I feel like this has got to be a thing. This is kind of like, as I view it, like speeding laws. There aren't enough policemen. And unless they're voluntarily coming along with us and say, this is a good way to go. It helps us balance training with punishment, helps us balance local control with USB control. I feel like unless they're coming along with us, this is not something we will successfully force on them. And that's kind of what I'm asking you.
Yeah, it is new. And as you know, whenever we have something new, you're going to have some people who are very excited about it. They catch the vision and they actually see how this transparency or common language can be helpful. And others worry about the quote unquote weaponizing, right? So I think with anything that's new, you're going to have some people who are excited and very supportive and others who are nervous about the change. But in general, I would say in all of the meetings we've been in, people they ask questions and they get it and they're like, yeah, this could be a good thing. I personally have not heard a lot of resistance or like, don't even go there. It's more, we like what we're hearing. We want to hear about it more so that we can understand it. And then we want to be part of the process. That's what I've heard.
Good. And just one more, I know I'm belaboring this, but this stuff like this really strikes fear in my heart because I hate punishment on the back end. I hate it. I think we way overdo that when our resources should be dedicated elsewhere, my opinion, an aside. So my follow-up question, I keep doing it to myself and then I forget what my question was. Yeah, probably it'll come back in a second, but thanks. Never mind. I'll come back to it when I come back. I leave my asides out and then I can probably get to my question. So I'm fine for now.
And we're going to go through the rule, and this is really going to go through each of these elements in much more detail, and you'll be able to see the words of how we've described it. It might be helpful to start going through the rule, and then you'll have more specific questions that address individual provision.
Oh, there you go. Quick question. Are there corrective action plans for category 1 or 2?
Not that I'm aware. Okay, well, actually, we're going to get to that. Currently, there are no staff corrective action plans that are in the areas of category 1 and 2. Corrective action currently would be in 3 and 4.
Okay.
This rule, however, adds a more of a process and expectations related to how the board could engage in corrective action in categories 1 and 2. And not that the board doesn't have the power or authority to do that now, they do. It's just practically speaking, we haven't had a process for that to occur where you get evidence. Because really the way you engage in corrective action is when you have evidence of non-compliance to a clear standard. So in order to have that, you have to have staff who said, here's the standard, we're giving you notice, this is what we expect. And then when LEAs don't comply with that, that's when the corrective action comes. So often in the areas of 1 and 2, the reason why corrective action doesn't occur is the rule or the statute's there, but there's no staff collecting evidence of non-compliance. There's no staff training to the, we see that you're not doing this, so let's help you. This is what our
That would be
expectation.
my
Do you
concern,
see?
is that we've kind of saying in category 1, well, we have this here, but we're putting it off. And then all of a sudden we're going to say, oh, you didn't do it right. We didn't tell you how to do it. We didn't tell you what to do, but you did it wrong.
Well, and we'll get into this in a bit. So generally, you're going to see the rule shows that staff corrective action occurs in categories 3 and 4 because there's a staff monitoring program at the direction of the board. 1 and 2, you'll see in here, it does provide a mechanism for the board to, there's some informal process steps, which are very similar to a legislative leader who shared her vision on Wednesday about meeting with the board chair and the superintendent, seeing if additional training is necessary. You'll see that's the more like we believe there's non-compliance due to a lot of information that's coming to us through our hotline, for example. First, we're going to look at this informally. And then if after that informal process, there are still concerns, you'll see that the board could direct IA internal audit to do an investigation for potential action. All of that, you arguably have general control and supervision, you have the power to do that, but we haven't really had a clear process in place for the board to take those steps. So that came about, and it wasn't initially something that we as staff had kind of envisioned, but as we've shared this oversight framework with policy leaders, including some legislators and board members, that has been a request. And that's why you'll see it in draft 2 today. It wasn't in draft 1, but so we'll go there. It's in the document, that differentiation between what corrective action looks like in each of the categories.
Thank you. Board Member Leader had a follow-up and then Member Hart.
Oh, and I did not. I did remember. I did remember my question, so I'll just ask that quickly. And it's more a comment. I don't know that we can answer. One of my lingering concerns is that, especially given the tenor of the board right now, I'm worried that every categorization of every rule is going to result in 2 hours of argument. And that's maybe not a problem that you can address. I just hope that, I think it could be helped if the elements of different categories are not crystal clear. That's not possible, but they're at least laid out so that board members can see if this, then that, if this, then that. So that was a concern that I have about adding one more very maybe hot button issue.
If I might, we've actually talked about maybe creating almost like a tool that the board, to your point, if this, then it, one, you're going to see these elements, 2, you're going to see these elements, et cetera. And almost like having a little cheat sheet for board members to kind of say for themselves to analyze the rule, the code, and what their own expectations are to then facilitate those conversations. And again, staff will have come with a first draft. This, based on our analysis, we think this is a 1, 2, or 3, or 4, just as a starting point. And there's going to be some limiting factors like dedicated staff. If you don't have dedicated staff, you're pretty much limited to 1 or 2. If you already have a monitoring program, or there's code language that says a state board shall monitor, like school fees, it says the state board, it says in code, if an LEA is violating a section of school fees law, the state board shall engage in corrective action. There's certain things that are going to be clear flags that it's either hopefully, we hope it's very easily to identify that it's either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4.
No, it's.
I'm grateful for board members Lear's optimism of only 2 hours per rule. Board member Hart.
It's going back to things that we expect LEAs and schools to do without a lot of guidance. We have I dare say, pages of those things already. They're in the assurance document. They range from having a plaque in every school that says "In God We Trust" to having a policy on discipline. I mean, yeah, there's guide. Well, I guess that one has a number of rules attached to it and policies, but there are things that, I mean, we've asked for years in that assurance document that things that have no guidance or training whatsoever, some of them are very straightforward and some of them are, well, I'm going to give it my best shot and hope it works. And then others, I know that people send questions up and send their policies up and say, does this make sense? It's not a new thing to have plenty of things that we don't train on, either because it's not needed or because it's just not provided. So I think we need to be very careful in moving from the space that we are currently, which is why I think it's really instructive when you look at that assurance document. It's sometimes surprising, especially if you look at the original assurance document of the things, the mountains that our LEAs have to climb in order to get to borrow a phrase, to get to what's right. There's no shortage of requirements for our LEAs to follow already. And it really is impressive what they can put together into a coherent whole for their communities that makes sense for their communities. So I want to make sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew in thinking that we're starting from zero. We really need to start from where we're at and move forward and make improvements. I say that because I think that if this does move forward and as we go, we are going to find many places where we go, oops, probably should have done that 5 years ago. And that's just, I think, a reality. And I think that, sometimes you have to say better late than never. So I do think I am always concerned about what we weaponize. I sit in a seat where in another part of my life where I am the target and those could be weaponized against me as an LEA. Why didn't you do this? Why, this has been on the books for years. Well, I wouldn't be able to show up to that job every day if I thought that weaponizing was going to kill me. Because I know that at the end of the day, what I can say is the board and I did our best shot. We just didn't know, but now we do, and here's what we're going to do. So I hear those concerns, but I'm really, instead of thinking that's a reason not to do it, I think that's even more of a reason to do it. That's not to say I'm really worried about what kind of task list it's going to create, but it is something I think is needed. So those are just some of my thoughts. The weaponizing thing kind of hits a little close to home because, I totally understand.
May I make 2 comments? So 2 things that your comments reminded me or made me think of. Number 1, often the reason we have a 27-page assurance list document is because legal requirements are passed and there's nobody here at USBE to provide training or support on those. And so USBE staff say, oh, well, then we better add it to the assurance because we want to make sure they do it. We want to make sure they know that now that the legislature passed this legal requirement, that they know they have to do this. And so really what you see in that assurances document is often well-intentioned USBE staff saying, all these requirements are coming down and we want to make sure the LEAs know. And that's why we're trying to move that to the administrative rules. The other thing that I'm hopeful, this goes to kind of your second point. Sometimes there are legal requirements that nobody even realized happened because it's in the assurance document and it's like a new superintendent or new charter director is like, I never knew that was something we needed to do. And the reason why this I will hope is not necessarily always used to weaponize, but it also can be used as an acknowledgement that resources were not given to either USBE or the LEAs to comply with this legal requirement. So there's two options. Either one, okay, if this really truly is a priority of the legislature and or the board for LEAs to do this, then either number one, you got to give us staff or just know that there's a good chance we're not going to be in compliance. And the third option is we could make a recommendation to repeal the requirement. That could be, because one thing we haven't really talked about is the other conversation of looking at things that might be in category 3 or 4 that we want to move to 1 to 2. Your priorities change, right? And things that are important, that were important 10 or 15 years ago, maybe we don't need those legal requirements anymore. Maybe that program has passed its prime and we can let go and then use those resources or those efforts somewhere else.
One other thing that I think we forget in policymaking, both here on the board and in legislature and in life in general, is let's take the easiest example of every class or every school has to have the "In God We Trust" plaque where it can be seen by everyone. That's such a basic requirement. Nobody really has a problem with it, but we forget that staff changes. We forget that districts have new leaders, new buildings are built, and they're like, how did you forget this? Or why is it all of a sudden, 2024 and there's no plaque in a building? Well, the building's remodeled, the building's rebuilt, new administrator didn't know that was a requirement. We do this when we say, well, the school has reached their goal of 95% of students attending 85% or more for that moment. That doesn't mean it's going to, that's not, like you said, that's not something you check off the list, which is why we have to have these kinds of things and why we have to have assurance documents, because it's also a check and it's a fail safe. It's a way to reduce risk because I now have a to-do list. Okay, can I make sure? Do my buildings have this? And LEAs and superintendents and boards can be reminded. That doesn't mean that they didn't do what they were supposed to in the past. It means that we often have to have those checks and balances, and we really don't in this right now. That's why this kind of thing is needed, because we have assurance documents, but that we know that's not enough. There might be training, there might be policy changes, there might be updates, and things can be sunsetted. We don't currently have that control in place to ensure that we are hitting our marks. And that's why, with all of the possible flaws or all of the enormous work that this is going to take, I think it's absolutely imperative that we find something that meets this need. Because as a person that sits on the other side, it is so mortifying when somebody says, hey, y'all passed this rule and there's this policy and it doesn't really make sense, or there's not resources. And I get a little sheepish. I'm like, I'm sorry, didn't think about that. Probably need to take that back to staff or committee or something. So we need that fail safe. And so I appreciate the work that's been put in on this. I think we've just started the journey. I think there'll need to be adjustments, but I very much think that this is something that's in some form or fashion is a control that we do not have in our system right now that would benefit all parties.
Ms. Nuttall, would you, any other questions from board members? No.
Not at this time.
Well, no, I think we're all supposed to have read the rule, right? If there's any particular questions, I would welcome those or to Ms. Nuttall. If not, I would just ask for a motion.
I do have a question, just on line 135, 136, that says that institution of higher ed is an oversight. Do we actually, can we tell higher ed anything?
We do
can.
with the prep programs.
With the
There's-
educator preparation programs.
Okay, so we set those requirements and then they are bound to follow those. Interesting. Thank you.
Can we have just a couple of minutes to just scroll through to, not that you don't have to speak to this. If we can just, the committee members can just have a few minutes to, because I did have some mental notes put in.
And board member Carey, if I might, I do think there is a significant section of new language in that from draft 1 to draft 2, that even if you had reviewed draft 1, it might just be good to note this. We can quickly just share it. But this came from feedback. It's really in section 5. Do you mind if I just share it? I know I just started. Thank you. So this is where you've got kind of the description of the categories 1, 2, 3, 4 above. We have some disclaimers in there that you'll see here that this is not a limitation on the board's power, but merely it's the board exercising its power to provide kind of transparency and clarity, and that the board could amend this at any time. And also that the board's internal audit function is not limited by this framework. So you'll see here, subsection 3A, this is beginning on line 232, is essentially the board saying to staff, this is our expectation of what you're going to do as far as monitoring and oversight, depending on category 1, 2, or 3, 4. So you can see here, category 1, 2, the superintendent, which means staff, shall refer reports and complaints back to the oversight entity for resolution, meaning it's a local control issue. Let's have our local leaders work on it. But there is an exception which states that the superintendent may work informally with an oversight entity to resolve an alleged compliance issue arising under a program or set of requirements in categories 1 or 2. I already described that we do that. For example, we did that with the open enrollment and how that works. And I know internal audit does the same thing. They might provide information to, when somebody reaches out to them under the hotline. Next, it talks about an alleged compliance issues related to category 3 or 4. The superintendent may issue formal corrective action, which is in this rule, and it's at the bottom, but it's really what currently is in 114. We currently have R277114, and it describes our corrective action procedures that staff use. 5 is really the new portion that I just wanted to bring to your attention. And this came as feedback and a request from certain leaders. And starting at 249. So 249. Again, this is something that the board arguably, and I would say does, have the authority and power to do. But there hasn't been a process or procedures in place for the board to take action in categories 1 and 2. So you'll see that 5A, 1 and 2 is kind of the more informal, like when something in category 1 or 2 comes to the attention of the board, then you can see that the board or board leadership may work informally with the oversight entity to resolve the issue, including for an issue regarding an LEA, meeting with the chair of the LEA's board, the superintendent or charter director. Or, and this was, if some of you have been, and I don't think Representative Pulsifer won't.
I just wanted to mention, I think you mentioned 1 or 2. This would actually be for any of the
That's
categories
right.
in 5A.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes, actually, this would be for any. Yes, you're right. Categories 1, 2, 3. It in B is where it's limited to category 1 or 2 or an uncategorized program.
So these are the specific things that were recommended in the oversight task force,
Yes,
correct? 'Cause
yes.
I'm reading through it. I'm like, this is really
Yes,
clear.
yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
perfect.
And then maybe, if there's non-compliance that's come to our attention, reaching out and identifying whether there might need to be additional training or allowing some additional time for LEAs to enact their policies or train their employees or come into compliance. And then, not that the at 5A is required before moving to 5B, but in general, I think what the board is stating is that would generally be their normal protocol, would be to start with 5A to resolve issues. And then you can see 5B for a set of requirements in category 1 or 2 or something that's uncategorized. If the board does not resolve the issue, does not elect to resolve the issue in 5 as you stated in 5A, or if it is not resolved through efforts described in 5A, the board may use their internal audit function to investigate the alleged issue. And then you can see based on that investigation, a number of elements could take place. And this is not an exhaustive list. It could be something that isn't even on here, right? Anyway, Tracy, I kind of took over because is that anything you would add there?
I don't think so. It's just that it's not that the board doesn't have the ability to use internal audit to investigate, but this would be a newer way that others in the education community maybe haven't seen before, that you're noticing. And then we tried to be as broad and yet a little prescriptive as possible in the 1, 2, and 3 there, to just say, really, you could take the results of that investigation and do whatever you wanted with them. You could take action. You could just say, no, you know what, it doesn't even matter. Or you could go ahead informally with that evidence and use it in that way. So just a way to gather more information. Oh, I will add too, one of the reasons for this language is that the board obviously has, if the board goes ahead with the framework, the board would obviously have the ability to go ahead and recategorize a rule and to say, this isn't working. This needs to be a category 3. Things are not happening at the LEA level in a category 2. But more frequently what happens from what we've heard is that there will be an individual LEA that is struggling to implement a program for one reason or another. And what this language does is it gives the board a more surgical approach to one LEA and being able to go in and investigate that LEA and resolve some issues without recategorizing the rule and doing things that affect all the LEAs. And so I just wanted to mention that because that's been a big, when you understand that, it helps the context, I think.
Because we've seen instances where non-compliance of 1 or 2 LEAs results in either legislation or board rule. And I don't want to name names, but there's some recent incidents where one district resulted in some very high level or very prominent code requirements, because of that. And this would be the opportunity. I think if you think about Representative Waldrop's idea a number of years ago to set up a panel where parents could bring concerns to the panel and then the panel could tell the LEA to reverse their decision. Or we've also heard of other legislators who've been interested in establishing an ombudsman office, either within the USBE, with the governor's office or the auditor's office. In some ways, this is a process that could then be used in lieu of some other opportunities, I guess, or different ways of addressing those concerns, and also would essentially, as Tracy stated, not hold the whole class back for recess, right? But instead support or help or identify the LEA that needs support, help, while the others can continue on in the local control business.
I have a question about this section, if that's okay. If that's in line, Chair?
Yes.
I'm wondering if it struck me that something is missing to me, but tell me if that may on line 262 would allow for that. And if you say yes, then I'm not worried. But I'm one of two things. I'm wondering if investigation might reveal that it needs to be sent back to the LEA. It doesn't say that here. Or I wonder if you want to have something, I always wrestle with if this is necessary or not, but, or take other action consistent with board authority, or something that's more of a catch-all there that isn't just close the investigation, resolve the matter informally, because that sometimes doesn't happen, or pursue corrective action. I wonder if one of those other two options might help here, or if you're telling me the May allows for other stuff already.
I think the catch-all could be a good addition.
The other thing I just wanted to add, and I agree, I think a catch-all would be great. One of the things that I and Tracy and I are very resistant to and hesitant to do is to bind the board in rule. If, as you may have noticed, our board rules generally are shalls and mays, either for staff or for LEAs, because the board has its power that is limited by the Constitution and the legislature. But generally, the board does not want to bind itself or promise anything. But we understand that in this space, actually clarity or a process, a defined process is a good thing for the board, right? But that's why you see the may though, is because you do have authority to do other things. And somebody, I'll just give an example. Somebody asked if in 5A, it should say the board leadership, or the superintendent, meaning staff. And I was like, you don't need to do that. You can always direct your staff to work informally, to do an investigation. So that is a power you already have. And so not everything is going to be delineated in here, because the more prescriptive we get, some people might use that as a limiting of your authority. And we're very, as your number one advocates, I would say, I mean, you of course are as well. We are careful about trying to limit your power.
But that's why I would like a catch-all phrase there. And I know this is a work in process, so I'm fine about you thinking about that. And I just hope that would be helpful. And I also have to just express something. We've had this conversation before about there were previous boards who said, no, we'll never limit board's authority. And my opinion is that that's a fairness issue for those that the board oversees, that we should give notice in rules of what the board will do, which may limit the board, but that is, I think, an appropriate thing for a government body to do in terms of oversight. So I'll just plant that seed and then say, I hope you can add a catch-all there. Let me just look. And so that's that section. Is there anything else where there are other, I'm sorry, Chair. I didn't know if there are any other sections that would bear more discussion.
That's the biggie.
Just a quick question regarding the language from 286 down. I think from 272 down. Is any of that, I know you have some slight word changes, but is that all copied? Because I didn't do a side-by-side comparison, but I assumed that it was.
There are quite a few changes, and yet we kept the basic structure, and all we did was kind of make it a little more robust. If you read through it, I think you won't be surprised by anything, but you'll just see that we added some really good, more concrete things in there. I guess that's the best way to describe it.
You guys are the best drafters ever. I love it when you put state and federal law and not like an administrative law. So I don't think that is necessary language, and like I said, I'm really glad the two of you are drafting.
I do have a question on the line 240. I'm sorry, Member Wood, were you? Okay. Line 249, for an alleged compliance issue regarding a program or set of requirements. This is for all categories, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk me through some of the discussions or rationale behind having either the board or board leadership make that decision? I could understand maybe on a category 1 or category 2, but when you're dealing with category 3 or 4, why not have the full board weigh in on that?
Go ahead.
So I think it's a lot of times if there are non-compliance issues, it's something you need to take care of quickly. And these are informal steps that it would be very difficult, for example, for the full board to meet with a chair or a superintendent. It would be a public meeting. And oftentimes these conversations are meant to be discreet and not shame the LEA, but to your point, though, I think later on, if the board did want to ask an LEA leader, maybe a board chair and a superintendent, to come and either present to a committee or the board, that would be what that would look like truly. Because once you have the full board together, you've got it's by definition, it's going to be a public meeting. So I don't know if that makes sense, but a lot of these informal steps are going to really require, it could be something the board directs. Like it could be that an audit report comes out, or it could be that the board receives a whole bunch of hotline complaints and you end up putting an agenda item on. And it could be that the board directs, but practically speaking, you can't necessarily have the full board go and meet with us, with a district chair, you
No,
see?
yeah, and I understand that. I guess I'm more concerned about board leadership resolving issues without the board being aware of that. And I don't see any limitation on that here. And this isn't about, trust or anything like that, but I do think that we need to make sure that board leadership is not informally resolving these issues without the full board at least being aware that there was an issue. And as I read this, I don't see any provision that protects, like that provides that. So I was thinking like the board or board leadership, with notice to the board may work informally. So I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to do it, but rather the board should have notice. And if confidentiality is a matter, then maybe we enter into executive session, but
Would it qualify as executive session? The only way it would be if if the possibility of legal action,
Or
right?
competence and character of an individual.
Would that-
So,
my brain was going there, because you're exactly right, but I was trying to figure out what would qualify it. Careful.
so
I'm always careful.
because I've seen that a couple times where it says board leadership has this right. And I think that's good. It gives us a certain nimble nature that allows us to address these before it gets bigger. But at the same time, I'm just concerned that that resolution without notice to the board.
no, I will say that just in the spirit of trying to represent the people who were asking for 5A 1 and 2, it is meant to be to inspire or influence and support compliance without shaming or making things public. Yeah, and so you get it. And it's hard because at some point, anything that goes to the full board is by design. It's public. I think so. I mean, we could probably, the other thing that, again, this is so new. It's a brand new thing. Some of these things we might learn over time and change these processes. It might be that it goes to audit, or you set up a separate committee that actually becomes the committee that reviews these things. We'd have to think through it, and the potential Open and Public Meetings Act or confidentiality and grandma provisions that apply, because when board members who are elected officials, it is different than when staff does that, right?
Yeah, and again, I understand the need for privacy. I like that. I like the fact that it gives these LEAs an incentive to resolve these things, because they know it's not going to be out in the open per se. But again, maybe for category 1 and 2, but when you go to 3 and 4, I just have a little bit more concern about that.
I think there's just some inherent trust that we have to have in board leadership, that when we elect them to do their job, that they are following process. They're going to be speaking in behalf of the board. They meet with legislators on behalf of the board all the time. They do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I had no idea until sitting in this seat how much they do outside of the 15-member body. And so I appreciate that there's this small group that can meet and take care of some of these things that really necessarily we might see that they just missed the boat in some area along the way. And so I actually like the wording here.
Any other questions? Any other matters you want to?
Just done a real. Doesn't prevail over the optimist in me.
Well, I'm comfortable with making a motion if that's in order.
Please.
Okay, I move that the committee approve R 277-114 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
To say as amended because we talked about some of those catch-all and one like.
Like, would you like us to update it with the catch-all? And if so, we can just do that and prepare that as a draft 3 and so it would be draft 2 as amended.
That's fine for, for me, or, I mean, the other committee members, they fine about that change.
What I like about that gives an opportunity to board members who will take the time to start to familiarize themselves with it, because they'll at least have something. So I like that idea.
So yes, add the catch-all or no add
I like forwarding draft 2 so that that's in there, and then having a draft 3 for the.
No, we will just prepare a draft 3 with the catch-all, and so then the 2 will be the committee's motion.
Yep.
I am guessing there might be some other changes that will, because this has honestly, every time we've looked at it, we've found betterments, so to speak, channeling former chair Mark Huntsman. We always find betterments. And so I think we can include the catch-all in the draft 3. And if we identify any other betterments from feedback from board members that we're like, oh yeah, we should have done that, we can put that in draft.
Would it be easy to do a side-by-side comparison on what was in the corrective action plan? If not, I'll do it myself. But if there was something you already have it in a form that, would it be easy?
I can forward that
Would
to
you
you.
forward
I'll
that to
prepare
me?
it.
That would be just a nice, as I move forward. Thank you.
So we have a motion before the committee, and that recommended action is that the committee approve R277-114 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Just vote.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
I'm going to ask.
Aye.
Yeah. I'm going to vote against this draft, but the vote appears to be 4-1 in favor of moving this on. Thank you.
This last one is very small. There's literally only 2 words that are changed in 100. Do you mind if we just share that? Or do you would like a break?
No, you please. I just have heard those words before. But go for it.
I was born yesterday, but not at night, right?
So draft 1 of R277-100 is simply being amended to strike the word oversee from the word monitoring, because really oversight and overseeing is the umbrella term. Monitoring is a sub-term. So we just wanted to strike oversee and oversight from the R277-100, remember, is the rule that just has a whole bunch of definitions that apply to all of our rules. And that's it. And you can see it there. Oh, why is it not showing?
It is.
But I'm sharing it on the screen, and
it's in the rule.
Yeah.
So you guys have not been seeing this whole time as I've been looking at different rules.
We've just been scrolling along. That's why.
That's weird. I wonder if that happened remember how it was in front of my screen and.
Yeah, if there's no questions. Oh, wait.
Sorry, one single question. Do we have a definition of oversight?
I don't think we do in this rule.
No.
And that would actually be probably our R277-114. But no, there's not a definition of oversight in here.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then if somebody else ready to make a motion.
I would love to. I move that the committee approve R277-100 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
There is a motion pending before the committee, and that is that the committee approve R277-100 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Aye.
Aye.
So the maker of the motion
Aye.
did not. Okay.
Oversight in the.
We don't have a defined term of oversight in R 277-100. So I would say if you look at the rule, that truly is in a lot of ways your definition of oversight. It is the oversight framework. It is such a broad term, it would almost be impossible to define.
And it is just, I think
Yeah.
I find it just all of a sudden,
General control and supervision.
Just for, I am voting against that motion as well. So that passes 4-1.
Oh, Chair Carey, I apologize if I voted early. Sometimes when the mic's not used, I can't hear. I thought it was just a blank pause. I didn't know there was conversation still happening. If I voted early, I apologize.
That's okay. We didn't count the vote anyway, because no, we did. But thank you.
That makes sense.
Thank you, Board Member Hannes. Thank you. It was counted. Then do we need to take a motion to adjourn? Then we'll make a motion to adjourn. Favor, aye. Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, committee.